On the Record with WRAL News.
Thanks so much for joining us for On the Record. I'm Lena Tillett. Fayetteville police say children living in Avantae Deven's home were isolated, starved, and beaten. Tonight, the adoptive mother of Blake and London Deven is accused of killing them and concealing their deaths. Children whose disappearance went unreported for years.
All of us have soft spots for children, and the cases with children are the most difficult that we deal with. So the fact that this involved allegations of the abuse and the death of children was certainly the thing that grabbed my attention first, particularly the manner in which the allegations suggest that they died.
Tonight, much of what we discuss will be difficult to hear, but to look away could be to repeat the mistakes that led to this horrific crime. Who was there for Blake and London Deven? And what can happen now to protect other children from suffering right in our communities? This is a complicated case involving adopted and biological family members, multiple County Department of Social Services offices, and a vast criminal investigation.
It's been shock. It just took my breath away. I wasn't expecting to hear about 2 remains at the time.
The biological mother of Blake Deven. Tonight, the WRAL reporter who's broken multiple stories related to this case is here to walk us through what we know about Blake and London and the very latest in the investigation. Chris Levengood is here in studio. Thanks so much for being here. Also here, Karen McLeod, the co-chair of the state's Child Fatality Task Force. McLeod is also president and CEO of Benchmarks, which is an alliance of agencies helping children, adults, and families. Thank you, Karen, for being here as well. Chris, I'd really like to orient our audience a bit and provide a timeline, because there's a lot here. This will be a condensed timeline because our first time hearing about Blake's disappearance was on March 28th. Fayetteville police at the time said the 17-year-old was missing, showing us a picture when he was much younger, saying this was the most recent photo they had. Yes, that young photo right there was what they said was the most recent photo they had. At the time, that was very strange. It was more upsetting then because police said he had not been seen since 2022. There was a lot that was bizarre to begin with.
Yeah, and even some family members said the aged up photo that you saw there was not accurate. They believe that it wasn't really it. But we do want to go further back than March because we have to look at this at a chronological standpoint. Yeah. So let's go through this timeline here. In November of 2023, Fayetteville police said that officers responded to a mental health crisis at the home on Berrydale Drive. That is the second location where the Deven family lived when in Fayetteville. Mm-hmm. Now, at the time, a person that was there told officers that Blake Deven had not been seen in 5 years. And when that person had last seen him, he had a broken arm. Then in January of 2024, we have the documents that list Blake Deven reported missing in January, but Fayetteville police, again, they didn't publicly announce this until March 28th. And then we saw that announcement on March 28th. That's when they released that photo that you showed there just a bit. But then a few days later, Fayetteville police announced they were also looking for London Deven, who at the time they believed would be 27 years old. Then the next day, the police chief held a news conference urging the public, trying to get help to find Blake Deven and London Deven. And then days after that, on April 12, 2024, Fayetteville police found partial skeletal remains in search for Blake Deven and London Deven. But investigators at the time, they didn't confirm who those belonged to. And then you will recall, June 26th, that's when Avantae Deven, the adoptive mother of Blake and London Deven, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and child abuse in relation to their death. And that was the same day during that press conference later in the day that I attended, where investigators say they found those skeletal remains and they identified one pair as London Deven and they believe the second to be Blake Deven.
Those details we got from that news conference were horrific. And again, you provided that chronological timeline there. It was odd to begin with, but always disturbing that we had not even known that these children were missing for years. So here is what the police officer said at that news conference. A burn barrel on a property connected to Deven with 2 sets of human remains in them were found, one belonging to a female between 15 to 19, the other belonging to a child between 7 and 10 years old, which we now know are Blake and London Deven. What else did they find?
So we have the arrest warrant, right? That kind of gets more specifics with it. And just It's hard. I mean, when you read that, the details that were in it, in there, it says that Avantae Deven forced one of the children to buy tools and dismember the body of Blake Deven. And we learned a little bit more about the conditions in the home as well. It said that actually Avantae Deven enlisted a friend of the family to pretend to be Blake Deven during a Cumberland County DSS visit. So that was, when we learned that bit, we wondered, did they not know what he looked like at the time to kind of piece together, did you not know who this person was? And then, as you mentioned, the remains were found in that burn barrel, partial remains in that backyard. It was a home on Beaver Dam Road in Autryville. And then that's when we started getting more specifics. But we also learned that there's a surveillance video that they eventually went back to at a Walmart where it shows them buying, Avantae Deven and one of the children buying this red cooler, where they believe that at one point London may have been transported in.
And police believe that one of the children she adopted helped her do this?
They said they believe that someone in the house is the way they worded it, but I was very specific in how I asked a follow-up. Was this person a family member? And they wouldn't get specific. Will this person face charges? They also said they're not going to comment on that.
It's as horrible as it gets. I think it's really important to describe how police believe these children died as well. In the warrant, it said, quote, after being exposed to isolation, starvation, physical, mental, and emotional torture for weeks and months at a time, Blake became lethargic and eventually became unconscious. And even after repeated pleas for help from his siblings, Deven refused to call an ambulance, essentially saying this was a slow death for Blake and potentially also for London. They were tortured, Chris.
They were tortured and deprived. They said they were locked in a room, small room, little, like no light, little to no food, and then a plastic container where they would use for, as they put it, restroom purposes, which your imagination could probably play that out. The conditions that these children lived in were horrific, and as you know, I interviewed someone who lived in the home. She used to go by the name Cherish Deven, but now goes as Brianna Morrow.
So she was one of the children Avantae adopted?
Yes, she was one that she adopted, and she had mentioned about being hit. I believe it was with a curtain rod, a metal curtain rod, talking about they had to write these paragraphs if they didn't do something that they wanted to earn food. And she was just devastated when we talked about it, but it was very vivid the way she described it, saying that this was just an awful home to live in.
Thinking that children were tortured right in our community. This is in Cumberland County. People were going about their daily lives, going to work, and this is what was happening next door. Karen, you sit on the state's child fatality task force, so I know you see a lot of horrific crimes, unfortunately, but what ran through your mind when you heard about this?
Oh, it was absolute shock, and it was one of the worst cases I've ever seen in my time, and I've been doing this for close to 30 years. It was absolutely tragic, and not to mention, we don't see this type of heinous crimes that usually occur in an adoptive family. This is pretty unusual. So, and then there was this timeline that was missing. What was happening during that timeline? There were so many questions, like I'm sure everyone who's listening to this, the questions are running through your head of what was going on, what was missed.
I think the biggest question people have is how is it possible that children's disappearance can go unreported this long and no one even thought, where are Blake and London?
Yes, and one of the things that I don't think most people understand is that once a child is adopted out of the foster care system, they are with that family, and that family has the right to do different things, take them on vacation, they can homeschool them. There's lots of things they can do, they can move. They are not restricted like they are if they are fostering the child, where there's people coming into the home on a regular basis. So once they're adopted, those sets of eyes are no longer on them.
And did Charity, I know she goes by Brianna now, did she say that she felt isolated in the home? Was she able to have friends? Were friends able to come by the house?
She didn't mention anything about friends. She had mentioned that they had, they were locked in the room. They mentioned that the refrigerator and cabinets were locked up. But I also want to clarify, because I spoke with someone, a former caseworker, that said that they actually encourage there to be some locks and stuff in place within reason so that a child doesn't get into something they shouldn't, making sure that windows are secure and that. But this, what she's describing, totally different. We're talking about depriving of food. food. We're talking about depriving of water. We're talking about depriving of light, Lena, like basic essentials that one would need to survive. And in terms of people coming to visit to the home, no. And in fact, I keep wanting to call her by her right. other name, but Brianna Morrow, she had mentioned that the last time she could recall actually going to the doctor's office in that home was when she was 10 years old. That was a while ago.
How old is she now?
She would be, oh goodness, early 20s?
Early 20s. All right, still to come, we've got to get into this. What we know about how Avantae Deven was able to adopt 5 children in North Carolina. Were there red flags in the process? Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about the horrific deaths of 2 children in Cumberland County, allegedly by the woman who adopted them. Fayetteville police telling us that Avantae Deven was able to adopt 5 children from 3 different counties in our state. Karen, I'd like to bring you back into this. Is that typical to be able to adopt children from so many different counties?
It's really not terribly unusual, and part of it is because when you move, oftentimes you're adopting and you're continuing to adopt, you'll adopt in the county that you're located at. So it's really not that unusual.
What's your understanding of the vetting process to adopt and also to foster? Because at first she was a foster parent.
So there's a process that you can do that's called foster to adopt, or you can just go in to do an adoption. And the foster to adopt, you're going through the process to foster, and that requires that you do 30 hours of something called a MAP training. The MAP training basically helps a person understand what the rules and regulations are around fostering, but it also gives them some skill sets to be prepared to take in a child who's been removed from their home, experienced trauma, and be able to support them. And then after that, there's background checks, there's a home study that's done. There's a lot of things, a lot of time spent with that individual preparing them to foster, and that's what she had done. She had fostered. You can also come in just as an adoptive parent. If you're adopting, then you have the option of whether or not you want to take the MAP training. You don't have to do it. It's strongly encouraged. But what you do have is a pre-assessment, pre-home assessment, where they are coming in and assessing whether or not your home is appropriate, you're safe, all the things that they do on the foster care. The fostering and the adoption process are 2 separate ones. If you're fostering to adopt, the counties really do try very hard to sort of align them, so it's not quite as disjointed, but it is 2 separate processes.
And once you adopt, what happens after that? Is the state visiting a couple times, seeing how the children are doing, or once they are legally your children, it's hands off by the state?
So there's a couple options there. One of the things that you can do is you can opt in to post-adoption support, and then you have a team who's coming out. And this is actually really important because when a child comes in to be adopted, you desperately want it to be successful. You do not want them to experience a rejection. So this team really helps the transition time, supports the parent and the child, helps them learn how to work well together, and also is just an ongoing on-call for the family if they're really facing some challenges. That's an opt-in. They don't have to choose it. So if a family adopts, at that point, once they are legally clear and adopted, they move forward, and there's not a follow-up. There's not ongoing engagement with the family.
And typically, as you said a few minutes ago, these families are generally successful. You don't need to have followed up with them.
That's right.
Chris, we've learned that Avantae Deven adopted Blake and his 2 brothers, correct?
Yep.
And that's typically what a system would want, to keep brothers and siblings together.
We get very excited when a family wants to adopt the sibling group, because when you think about it, when a child is removed from the home, the only family they have left are their siblings. They are removed from their parents. And so keeping that sibling group together, we know from lots of research, is better for them. There are cases where it is not appropriate to keep the siblings together, but for the most part, we're super excited when that happens.
Could the desire, though, to keep brothers together have overridden maybe any concerns they had with that parent?
So what I would say is, as a whole, the child welfare system is in crisis. It is woefully underfunded. We are one of 9 states in the nation that has what's called a county-administered state-supervised system, which means our 100 counties have a DSS in each one of them, and the state is responsible for supervising them. Out of those 9 states that do this, we are the lowest in our state funds for child welfare services. Beyond that, even if you look at the state administered, if we look regionally at the states near us, we are still, if you look at the 7 states around us, we are still the lowest of the 7. And on average, our regional partners across our sister states are paying over 2.5 times the amount of state dollars than what is being paid for in North Carolina. When you're in that kind of crisis, it has lots of effects. And one of the big effects we've seen is a huge impact on the ability to recruit and retain workers. 1 in 4 frontline caseworkers will leave before the end of the year. There is, and
that's consistency,
yes,
right?
That's
How
right.
are you able to stay with the family, know the dynamics of the family, know the dynamics of the parents involved here, if you're out after a year?
That is correct. And what we know is when there's a lot of turnover, you'll see a longer period of time children are in care. You'll see it takes longer to get to permanency, what we call permanency, where they're eventually going to go and live. And in fact, if there's a change in the caseworker, their success rate for a permanency placement runs from 70% down to 20%. So we know that disruption is really, really powerful. We also know, and I think this is important to note, that currently, our state does not have a case management system that runs across all 100 county DSSs. That means that there's no way, if they move to another county, that next county knows all the details of the things that are happening. Most people are not aware of this, and it's been a huge hindrance for our county DSSs. They have been desperately wanting to have this type of system. The department is currently working on it. They are in the process of building it. The hope is that within the next 3 years, from intake to adoption, they will have a complete case management assessment. They are going to be lifting up shortly the intake. They'll be doing some pilots, and they'll be lifting up the intake component of that.
Chris, I know you want to speak to that.
Oversight. I mean, that to me, that has been one of the focal points that I've been trying to get into. Who is responsible for this happening, whether it's slipping through the cracks, not checking in? And the former caseworker that I spoke with, who used to be the caseworker on the Deven family in the early 2010s, was talking about the difficulty that it can be to try to, even if you think something's wrong, to try to make something happen from that. For example, she said that she felt like something was kind of off. And I asked her, well, what was that? And she didn't want to go too much into it because she wanted to respect it.
I want to play that soundbite, Chris, because
Please.
that was really, really enlightening. Let's take a listen. Her name is Catherine.
This woman was able to convince 3 different social workers, 3 different state agencies, 3 different case managers for her home as it was licensed. If extending supervision for an adoptive home could possibly prevent this, then I think that we should work towards that.
How was it that?
And she told you that something felt off about Avantae Deven, but that wasn't going to be enough.
As she mentioned it, you could go to a judge and go, hey, I felt something off. And the judge's going to go, okay, what proof do you have? And you may go, you don't have proof for it. You need tangible evidence, something recorded, or hey, there's bruise marks, etc., to show that there's something off. Your feeling, your gut feeling doesn't necessarily constitute for you actually to do that. Yeah. And then we're talking, the counties she's talking about is McDowell, Buncombe, and Madison counties.
Smaller counties, fewer resources.
And the question is, again, where was the oversight lapse here in terms of people not checking on it? And then the other part, as she talked about a little bit ago, is you don't, once you're adopted, depending on the option you take, state, it's okay, this is your child now, right? Yeah. Like you can take care of the child, but if no one's checking in, what happens there? And that's why I went to the North Carolina Department of Human Health Services, and I asked, as we confirmed, that they are investigating how this happened, but I also asked, was she accepting adoption support while Blake was missing? They said they couldn't answer that during this investigation right now. That is a reasonable question, because it speaks to whether she was still taking some sort of adoption assistance while he was missing and dead.
All right, we have to take a quick break. So many want to know, how can we, us as citizens, us in our communities, protect vulnerable children like Blake in London? We talk about possible solutions. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue to discuss the horrific deaths and disappearance of Blake and London Deven, and also how the circumstances around their deaths were even able to happen in the first place. Chris, one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the police warrants is they were describing how isolated these children were. People have asked, well, were they in school? Who in the community knew that they existed? And you're learning that they were potentially homeschooled.
Deven Academy is what it's called. That's the address or the school that's tied to the address where they lived, and that's where they attended it. Whether they got an education, I couldn't tell you that because obviously it's their private information. But in terms of getting some sort of formal education, nothing that I have seen suggested that they did.
And that would speak to how people just for years didn't know where they were.
Yes, and I will say one of the positive things about the electronics case management system that they're building, it is built into the school system and the court system. So they will know if a child is in school or if they are homeschooled. And if there's concern about them not being visible for a period of time, this system, once it's up and running, will give them that visibility.
Let's talk about the Child Fatality Task Force that you sit on for the state. What will you be looking at for this case?
So the task force is a statewide look, and every county has a fatality review team. And those teams the teams will be looking at this case amongst many, and they're looking at deaths for both expected, like it's intentional or unintentional. So they look at all of them. They bring that data up to the statewide task force, and we look at systemic issues. Obviously, one of the things that the task force looks at a lot is intentional death and how we can strengthen the DSS system. One thing I would note that I am pretty excited about is in 2017, Senator Berenger, who is now Supreme Court Justice Berenger, at the time when she was a senator and also an adoptive parent of 3 children out of the foster care system, she came in to really try to make a difference, and she passed 2 omnibus bills, child welfare omnibus bills. One of them created a 7-region oversight of the counties. As I mentioned before, we're state administered, as a county administered, state supervised. Right. That means we've got the state expected to see all 100. This creates a 7-region and teams in each of those to be able to work with the counties in there. This is a much better touch point that we're very excited about the possibility of strengthening the counties. The other thing I would note is that expecting a state system to be able to manage 100 counties is extremely difficult if it's not properly funded. And as I mentioned, it hasn't been. There has been funding for this 7 regions, and we're really hopeful it will help.
Chris, I want to give final thoughts to you because, frankly, I've been so impressed by your reporting on this. You had a hunch from the very beginning that something horrible happened here, and you did not stop. You made sure that we stayed on top of these stories and that these children's lives mattered. Just tell us your final thoughts. Because
we had so many different plot points of what happened, but no plot line to talk about it. We kept seeing, oh, police are saying that Avantae Deven says that her child had been missing for a couple of years, but only recently that it was reported. Yeah. What? If my child had been missing and I didn't report it for a while, I would believe that I might at least be charged with negligence. And that's why I thought she hadn't been charged yet. I'm sure there's part of the investigation where that didn't happen right away. But that is why I kept digging into this, because it did not make sense. And I don't usually like to use adjectives to describe what I do, but it was bizarre. The story it's bizarre, the circumstances. That's why I kept digging into it. And because ultimately, 2 people who are entrusted into a system are no longer here right now.
Well, hopefully the lessons we learn from this can save other children. Karen McLeod, Chris Lemongood, thank you so much. If you have something to say about tonight's discussion, you can find me on email. Have a great night.